I'm going to actually kick off this one with a supporter question from Jay Fischetti. John, triple exclamation mark. Daytona 2 is finally coming to consoles. Block capitals. I think this might be a quadruple question, exclamation point. Sega keeps utilizing the Yakuza games for these about damn time ports. What other Sega games do you want to see? So we actually saw this week a trailer, right, for Daytona 2, a port of Daytona 2, which is a brilliant game, which we haven't seen yet converted to any home consoles, as far as I'm aware.
You are
So
correct.
you must be pretty excited, John.
Yeah, it's never been released home officially. We've only been able to access it through real arcade hardware or somewhat okay emulation. And yeah, so they announced that it's coming as part of the latest Yakuza game, or Like a Dragon as they call it now, like the original Japanese name. They're calling it, of course, Sega Racing Classic 2, as they did with the original, because, I suppose they've lost the rights to use the Daytona name. So that's kind of a good way to get around that, right? But yeah, this is big news because it basically means that we're finally seeing real Model 3 emulation in a shipping product. And that also means that Fighting Vipers 2 is also listed on there, which in its arcade form was also a Model 3 game. Um, so there's a couple things that I take away from this. First of all, yes, it's great that they got Model 3 emulation working. It's really cool. It's going to be accessible within the game, though I would like to see it standalone as well. But I was more surprised initially at the lack of Virtua Fighter 3, given that they had included Virtua Fighter 2 in the past and such, which made me start thinking, like, do they have some kind of like Virtua Fighter anniversary thing lined up? Maybe we'll actually get Virtua Fighter 3 some other way, possibly, because that 2 has never received a proper Model 3 conversion to home. There's the Dreamcast game, which is good, but it's a big step down visually still, even though it was amazing for the time, not to knock it. But Daytona 2 specifically, though, is one of the ones I'd been wanting for a very long time, just because it's Sega at their best in terms of racing games, like the handling, the track design, just the feel of playing it. The only Sega racing game I'd say that's better than Daytona 2, but it's very different, is Outrun 2. So this is up there as one of the best games, one of the best racing games ever made. And
Hmm.
I'm super excited to see it. As far as other games I'd like to see, though, I would definitely want to see other Model 3 games, such as Scud Race, which
Yeah.
is another showpiece title that still looks amazing today. And it would be funny to see something like Emergency Call Ambulance on there, if you guys have ever played that.
I haven't. I am thinking about Spike Out though. That's another Model 3 game which
Oh yeah, the
was
original
kind of,
Spike Out.
yeah, criminally underutilized outside of its original arcade
It
implementation.
got a weird sequel on Xbox, but yeah, the original Spike Out, exclusive to arcade.
Yeah, there's a lot there that I'd be really interested to see, and the concept that they've actually cracked the emulation, hopefully, and I'm just sort of hoping that M2 are involved at some level here. That would be the ultimate, right?
Yeah, I mean, I hope they've done well in the past with emulations within these games, so I'm not too worried about it. But I'm very
Hmm.
curious to see how this plays out, given that they've never really attempted this before. So, but yeah, the Model 3 games just I've been waiting to see this on home consoles in some form, because if you weren't there and you didn't experience what this was, like Model 3 arcade hardware was truly like going multiple generations ahead.
Yeah.
It's equivalent to having like an 8800 GT, and then 2 years later you've got like an RTX 2080 or something, right? Like it just felt like this like leap into the future, like beyond anything you could have ever imagined. Like, how is this even possible on anything? There was just nothing like it at the time,
Yeah.
and it felt like the future.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
reminded of the Ultra 64 stuff where, basically people, as I just said, people just bunged in the silicon graphics shots from any given movie, Terminator 2 being the classic example. But then when Model 3 arrived, you had Dural, mimicking the liquid metal of the T1000. It was like, okay, this is the real deal. This is awesome. And I actually think that was kind of like Sega at its technological heights.
it was, yeah.
and
It's
it was kind of like, they just went for, more cost efficient hardware beyond that.
Yeah, and that's like VF3 as well was doing crazy stuff. Like it was one of the first games I can recall to really go big on inverse kinematics. So like you actually have like proper foot placement that changes with the terrain, which is why I believe they moved away from flat fighting arenas for that game. So they could actually have the characters now standing on a slanted rooftop and their footing actually looked accurate and true to the level itself. That stuff was unbelievable for the time. Just the texture quality, the fluidity of it. I think every Model 3 game is all about 68. Well, it's like 50 something FPS. It's not exactly 60, but it's right around there effectively.
Yeah.
But lots of arcade games use weird refresh rates, given that CRTs were so flexible. But yeah, so that's just awesome, man. Like I love this stuff. It's the best. It's the best time for Sega.
So Oliver, as the youngest member of the DF team, how does this news land with you?
Well, I have played quite a bit of Daytona USA, but in its downloadable form, guys, on PlayStation 3, which I thought was quite good. I think it's since been delisted. I've never played Daytona 2, obviously, just in arcades, well before my time.
Man.
But I would really prefer a separate full release on digital storefronts instead of packing like a really good arcade racer with a totally different game, which you may or may not be that interested in. Sega, it would be nice if they did a bit of a better job with their back catalog, releasing them on more modern platforms.
Yeah.
Well, they've kind of done, so that's the problem I have with Sega's efforts in this area, is that they've primarily focused on the Mega Drive, and I love the Mega Drive, don't get me wrong, but like it feels like they're willing to go up to like 1995 and just say stop no matter what. There's no Saturn representation. Their arcade stuff beyond that is somewhat spotty. Like they just seemed fearful of actually diving into this stuff, but it's a real shame because there's a lot of amazing stuff there. And even if you look at like Saturn, like just a proper remaster with a high frame rate of something like Burning Rangers, how incredible that would be, right? Just these games that were really pushing real cool, interesting, fresh ideas at the time, only on Sega Saturn. Come on, love to see that stuff. But man, Oliver, go ahead.
Isn't it the case, though, that it is basically when the hardware started to get really challenging to emulate that Sega just basically stopped?
They did, which is why this is this is great to see. And they've emulated Model 2 before as well, or at least some kind of conversion. I'm not sure how they're actually doing it, to be honest. But Oliver, if you ever get the chance, though, if you see a Daytona USA 1 of the full arcade cabinets on the hydraulic system with all the motors and such, you gotta sit down and play it. It's such a ride. Because, I mean, there's old Sega arcade games. It wasn't just the game. The game was amazing, but it's the cabinet. The full giant cabinet you climb into that moves in all directions. And it feels unbelievable. It's just an awesome time. It really sucks you right in. Speaking of which, I think I only made you guys recently. I found a machine to play Daytona USA 3 recently.
Oh, wow.
So okay. I don't know if you've seen that, but they did a Daytona 3 and then they did an update for it. And that version has remakes of tracks from Daytona USA 1, maybe 2, actually. I can't remember now. I need to check again. But so they have kind of kept this alive to some degree with an actual sequel. And the sequel is pretty good, I would say. Though it just doesn't match the thrill of Daytona 2 somehow.
Fair enough. Well, I would like to see a standalone release for that. I'm kind of with Oliver. The concept of bundling it in a new game is fine, but give the game the highlight, the limelight it deserves. I guess is my thoughts on that.